Hello, everybody. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are excited to have you here today. We're going to just give a moment for folks to join. Please go ahead and tell us in the chat where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see where folks are tuning in from. Okay. Just give it another 30 seconds here. All right. It looks like we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We're really excited to have you here. And as I said before, if you just joined, please in the chat, tell us where you're zooming in from. I'm Melissa Barker. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Lead from Polar Steam. And we're really excited to have you here today. I'm just going to give a little bit of background about the program and kind of set the stage for today before I turn it over to Walter and Madeline. Polar Steam is an NSF-funded program based at Oregon State University that facilitates field-based collaborations between artists, polar researchers, and educators to enhance science communication and broaden the reach of polar science. Madeline, Madeline is our first Polar Steam Artist Fellow, and I know we're all really excited to hear more about her experience. We're also excited to share that we have artists in the final stages of logistics approvals for the 2025-2026 Antarctic season. So stay tuned to our website. We'll be posting more information as that moves along. We also anticipate opening for the next round of applications for the Polar Steam Antarctic Artist and Writer Fellowship in the spring. We encourage all types of creatives to apply. So we'll have, again, more information on our website. If you're on our email list, you'll also get a notification when that application opens. We have selected our 2025-26 Educator Fellows, and they're posted on the website. And we also plan to open that application for the next round in the spring. If you're an NSF-funded polar researcher who's interested in collaborating with educators or an artist, please send us an email. We'd love to work with you. If you have questions about our artist, educator, or researcher programs, please refer to the information on our website. The FAQ section is particularly helpful. And then we'll also update the Apply Now page as we have more information. Today, we're excited to interview Madeline and hear about her experience. The interview will really focus on the art, the science, and the experience on the ship. We did get some questions about the program, and I think I've answered most of them already, and the rest can be answered in our FAQs on our website. Afterwards, a recording of this live stream will be posted on our YouTube channel. We invite you to submit questions using the chat function in YouTube, and we'll answer them. We'll work to answer those in the second part of today. We may not get to all of them, but hopefully we also anticipate a lot of them will probably be answered during the interview as well, but we'll try to get to most of the questions as we can. On that note, we are thrilled to have Polar Steam Artist Fellow Madeline Blount here with us today. She has just returned from about 7.5 weeks aboard the Research Vessel Nathaniel B. Palmer, where she worked alongside the science team led by Kevin Arrigo. Our talk today will be hosted by MacArthur Fellow and multidisciplinary artist Walter Kitundu, who is an advisor to the Polar Steam Antarctic Artist and Writer Program. We're thrilled to have you both, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Hi, Madeline. Good to see you again. I've been looking forward to our conversation. I think I'm just going to jump right in and ask you just about your practice, your art practice, and if this was like a natural extension of the work you do, or if it felt like a big leap. And I think the main question is like, what's the nature of your past work and how does it lead into the desire to do something like this? To say I'm going to be on a boat in the middle of the Southern Ocean.
Yes, great. Thank you, Walter, and thank you everybody watching, and thanks Polar's team. Um, my practice. Okay, so I am also a multidisciplinary artist. I have a pretty eclectic background in terms of training and what experiences I bring to my work. And in a way, I would lean in first to saying that this is sort of a natural extension of the rhythm of my practice, which has these periods of like intense immersions in an environment. I like to sort of throw myself into an experience, make myself into almost a kind of sensor or instrument for imagery, sound, other kinds of experience, and then make work from that intense like field time. Um, I'm also someone who I've I've pursued as much as I possibly can science and art simultaneously in my work. So I do have that formal background in science. I'm a coder and a programmer, and I currently teach at an engineering college here in New York City, where I'm based. And so I had like field work and lab experience before this residency. Um, and in terms of art, I came up in performance. So I trained in music as a kid and did a lot of performance and movement work in college and beyond, and kind of have always had photography and this sort of multi-sensory, like diving into an archive, multi-sensory creation of archives of a place, trying to evoke a place, as something that is a through line in a lot of otherwise radically different projects. So yeah, I think like intersection of art and science, evoking an environment, intensity of field type experience. And also I maybe there are other folks here who experience this, but I've just always had a longing and a desire to go to Antarctica specifically, since I was a kid, dreaming of like penguins and vast open spaces and nature and adventure. So yeah, in a lot of ways, this was a extension and kind of a fulfilling of a lot of different paths in my life.
Wow. That's super interesting. I love your description of yourself as a sensor or an instrument. It sort of fits really well with you becoming part of a scientific expedition. Um, but I want to know a little bit about like your direct experiences. And so can you tell us a little bit about the boat, about the people you were with, and like what did it feel like when you first like stepped onto the boat? And then what were your days like?
Yeah. Wow. Trying to remember when I first stepped onto the boat is sort of it's trying to almost like undo, trying to imagine not having all this knowledge because the boat experience is so intense. Uh, but yeah, I guess maybe I can start by sharing my screen. I have like a photo of the boat and some of the lab spaces we were working in.
That'd be
Um,
great.
start with some of those. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah. Okay.
Mm,
Yeah. This is not day one. It was actually relatively early in the cruise, though, and we call it a cruise. A science expedition on a boat is actually still like in the lingo a cruise, which initially was funny to me, but now seems normal. So we get on the boat in New Zealand. Um, there are roughly 40, 45 people on the boat, all told, all the science team and the crew and another educator fellow. And some folks know each other. I didn't know a single person on board beforehand. So there's a lot of like getting to know the literal space of the boat. The Palmer is, the size of a football field. Finding your room, finding out when we all eat together, like just logistics. Learning about the science, signing up for shifts, taking safety training. So the early experiences are just you're like thrown in from day one, sort of um, 12 plus hour days. Um, and then ultimately we start the steam. So we leave New Zealand and we head toward the study site which is a like predetermined set of coordinates pretty close to Antarctica in the Southern Ocean. Yeah, and my days. So after that like flurry of intro, uh,
Can I just ask quickly, were you like, did you have any time to be nervous? Like, what were your thoughts in those days? Were you anticipating what was coming up, or were you just fully in the moment,
I
taking all that in?
I was so excited. I actually did look back in my notes from that time, and it's just um I think I personally just found it very calming to have this like intense structure, intense set of new people. I knew my task is just to be there and soak it all in. And volunteer, like sign up for things, say yes to the science shifts that are coming in, all the knowledge, the things that you have to be learned and trained on. So uh yeah, I was just so excited, to be honest. I was maybe slightly nervous about getting seasick.
Mhm.
Um, but we all take meds together. Everyone's like, time for the pill. And I just hope for the best. And fortunately, I actually had a pretty okay experience with that. Um, I was never out of commission from seasickness, which was great.
Yeah.
Um,
So you were going to tell us about your days.
yeah,
Yeah.
so this was a surprise to me. I wasn't sure how much of the science I'd be involved in as opposed to specifically the creative research project that I proposed and came with. But I think it was a good choice. I signed on to do, and this was on offer, to be a full member of the science team and join the shifts. So everyone works these 12-hour shifts that start at different times of the day, so that the boat is working 24/7. Um, so I would get up at 3 a.m. And this photo of the bow here going through ice is like sunrise time. And so yeah, from 3 a.m. until 3 p.m., I was on call with the rest of both the biology and the chemistry team to be ready to take seawater samples from something called a CTD. I'm going to go to the next slide, which should have a picture of that. Yeah. Um, and the CTD, that stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth. It's just basically a machine that holds a lot of sensors, again, sensors in this giant ring. And then you can sort of see the gray structures around the ring are bottles for seawater. So this circular object gets like lifted on a crane, like winched up and dropped hundreds, sometimes thousands of meters below the surface of the water. And we all like wait for it to come up. So that's sort of the rhythm of it. You like hurry up, get it ready, drop it and wait. Uh, and then as it comes up, the scientists determine exactly which depths they want the bottles to close at. So we know that, hey, bottle one was closed at 1,000 meters. Bottle two was closed. This water's from 200 meters. Um, so then we can like sample and study that water. So you can see the people in this picture here are like rushing towards the CTD, and they take smaller bottles, we, myself included, you put a little tube attached to it and fill your smaller sample bottles with from the big bottles. And then you take that water. And I was involved with running it through a microscope to check for what kind of phytoplankton was there, like phytoplankton, microscopic plants, plant cells, plant-like cells, I guess. Other folks were looking at like chemical composition of the water. Um, so yeah, I was fully involved in like taking these samples and looking at them in a quantitative way. Um, and how that worked with the creative part of the project was the rhythm of those shifts still involves being aware that maybe I had 4 hours until the next time that machine was going to come up. So I would use those 4 hours. I would take a photo, go back on deck and do some creative experiment of my own that I wanted to do, record a sound, and then I'd make sure to be back in time for the science.
Yeah, that makes me really curious about how to, I have so many questions. I think one is just thinking about like you as an artist, like being heavily involved in like the day-to-day scientific work. Did they give you a big brief and so you understood the context of what you were studying, or were you sort of moving in smaller increments, just like doing this one particular task to gather? And then let's start there, and then I'll ask more. Yeah.
I would say that's a good question. It's kind of a combination. There were these like great meetings periodically on the boat where people would share a talk, something that they were working on, or the context for why we were there, the bigger questions. But the training for the actual work, it was like a careful few hours in the beginning, but it was still, hey, this is a pretty simple physical task that you do repetitively. You get ownership of it pretty quickly. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna fill my bottles now. So I think I was aware of my like tiny part in the larger project, but through time and talking with people and getting more comfortable with the work, you sort of osmose where the research is going and how your little bottle of seawater connects to the larger picture.
Mhm. And did those times when you had a break feel like tiny parts of your larger project? Where you did it feel like those were focused times and you knew what you wanted to get to, or were you in more of a gathering state, a data gatherer?
Yeah, totally. I think this was like the biggest shift for me and surprise. I definitely was more in like data gathering mode myself than in like art making mode or conclusion analysis, like concept, all that stuff. For the scientists too, can happen like up to years after the field work. So I initially envisioned, first of all, I didn't know I'd have like 10 hours of other work a day, but I initially envisioned that I'd have my little space and I'd be taking in data, both like numeric data points that I want to code like interesting media out of, but also just the imagery and the sound and the multimedia stuff. I was imagining I'd be making things from that there and sort of sitting with the material more. When in fact I was more like, okay, I'm gonna take my camera, I'm gonna run outside and be with some birds and then like maybe if I'm lucky, I'll like transfer that to a hard drive and that's move on to the next thing.
Um, you mentioned birds, so I'm gonna have to ask you about that because I'm a birder as well. And I know you're a birder, and for me, sometimes the birds feel like they could be distractions, but they're actually how I ground myself, particularly in a new environment. I feel like the birds really show me what I need to pay attention to because they're so good at that. So I'm just wondering what role the birds played for you on this trip, and then we can get back to the arts and sciences, or maybe it's all rolled into one.
Oh yeah, I love how you said that and how it's grounding. And I think I can say the same. I'm not sure I would have put that together before, but let me switch to I can show. Oh, this is a quick photo of me on deck doing work with the chemistry team, the trace metal team. But yeah, I would also say the presence of the birds was very grounding. You can go out, and for me, like having this be a practice for I've watched birds and taken photos of them since I was a very young kid. But being able to have this encounter, um, this is a light-mantled albatross, and they are so curious. They fly right up to the boat. And albatross, like you don't always see them flap very much, right? They just sort of gracefully seem to float by on these thermals and currents that are around you. So yeah, like after being in the internal lab spaces, maybe very focused on a very small numerical quantity or something, to run outside and see like the vastness of the ocean and then this like little bird with an almost like cartoon smiley face riding up at you. It was just such a joyful part of the experience and certainly where like my curiosity, where my lens wanted to go was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna spend time with these birds, like get up close and personal with these. There's another albatross here. There's a white-capped albatross. Yeah. And with albatross in particular, maybe this is part of the grounding. Like they're always looking at you. They're like we are aware of each other in these photos. Even if my lens like brings me close and I'm pretty far away, like the way they use their vision, they're aware of us as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I always feel like people tend to focus on themselves watching birds and they forget that they're being watched as well. And then once you're aware of that, you can actually figure out how to like integrate yourself into the environment a little bit more completely. But that's really cool. I'm also noticing the backgrounds are like so they seem so varied of these images, and it makes me think of the water as a landscape, like a transforming landscape. Can you talk a little bit about if like your connection with the water itself as a like your primary landscape?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that and noticed it just from these pictures because, right, on the one hand, you could say, oh, we're on this boat. We were mainly in the same area of the Southern Ocean, chugging back and forth. Like maybe it's the same landscape outside every day. And that's like, that couldn't be further from the truth, I think, for how I experienced it. The water shifts constantly with the light, right? This is that same, the white, light mantled albatross from the first. I'm not sure if that was the same bird. I'm not gonna go and say it was the same bird from the same day. But right, this image almost looks like it's like collaged on top of a swimming pool background or something, right? Like the water, there were times when I felt like the water was like thick, almost like clay, like I wanted to reach out and touch it. So yeah, I think the water, it did change constantly. It was something that was an inspiration to me to seek out that texture. Um, yeah, this almost dark, like black look. We had some fog, a lot of foggy days too, which like again just presented more interesting light.
Yeah, one of the things about birds for me is that they always make me feel like I'm not quite alone in those spaces. And people often really talk about the isolation of Antarctica, and and those regions in particular. And I'm just wondering, like, can you tell us how you felt about that?
Yeah. Um, I feel the same way, just in terms of birds making me not making me feel not alone. And like the words I would use even on the boat to say like, oh, I'm gonna go spend time with some birds, right? I literally am gonna be with them. And I think I like particularly those a lot of the in-flight photos. It's a very physical feeling for me, like tracing their trajectory and moving the camera around. Um, but yeah, I think that's another surprise for me from this experience. I definitely envisioned a very like contemplative, almost solo, like it'd be me and the landscape or me and the environment, and like I'd really get in touch with my inner thoughts. And it was not that. Both the environment not feeling that desolate even at sea, but also just the experience of a community on a boat is just so constant and so there are people with you 24/7, small spaces, intense work like together as a team, but also just like very like joyful and raucous and silly. And it's a really different energy than I expected. It's one I really, really liked, but it certainly like my experience was not one of isolation.
That's really interesting. It makes a lot of sense. Like when you you sit and think about all the people on a boat in one place, you're kind of all alone together. Um, and in that spirit, like, did it feel like we were talking about arts and science collaborations? Can you talk a little bit about collaboration? Did it feel um, like you were collaborating on the scientists and being an artist alone, or did it feel like did the work on board feel like it was working on you? Like somehow the scientists were collaborating in your art practice as well?
That's a really good question. I think I think it felt like a little bit of both.
Mm.
I was certainly like, an add-on member to the science team and contributing in that language, right? I didn't approach that shift as like, I'm here, the artist, to do the microscope work. I was like, I'm here to do my microscope work. Um, and there's a lot of like decision making and meetings that I'm not necessarily a part of the decision making as someone who joins, late and not at that level on the team, but I'm like privy to it, and it's not sort of like, oh, here's the artist's opinion. That sort of hierarchy collapsed in the work. But I I found it really interesting, maybe like outside of the discipline of like dividing something into art or science, there was like a goal for the boat, right? A goal for the cruise itself, like a question we're answering, or even just like a human endeavor to be down there. And it felt like the role of the artist, the role of having someone aboard who wants to focus on the aesthetic or wants to focus on the story and bring different elements into um, the experience and prioritize those things. I think that was a really like important role and collaborative in sort of the larger project, even if maybe the scientists weren't like directly focusing on the artwork, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that something you kind of discovered, or um I guess it ties into the question of like expectations or questions, like, the questions you might have had going in, thinking like, I want to ask these things and see if I can get the answers. And then like how did those get either thrown out or answered, like once you got on the boat and began to spend, I mean, 7.5 weeks is not a short amount of time. Uh,
And
how
it's
did
weird.
how did your thinking kind of evolve?
Well, how I'm living in that time now, or thinking about it, it sometimes feels like the whole thing was over, instantly, and other times it's like that was somehow my real life, and now I'm here. So I'm certainly still sort of like dealing with it and processing it in that way. It's not a short amount of time. It is kind of enough to rewire your brain, I think, a little bit. And your body, like what happens on the boat is different than um but yeah, I would say I think there were a lot of shifts. I really tried not to go in with too many specific expectations. Um, and the folks helping me prepare, like at Polar Steam and the Antarctica program, everyone was always like, the one thing we can be sure of is how like everything is going to change. So you have to be very, very flexible. So um, I went in sort of knowing that I should have some goals. I should have some idea. I should like bring the equipment I need, right? But otherwise, I was pretty prepared to just sort of let the experience wash over me and be aware of trying to follow that curiosity and use my time well and yeah, approach it that way. So things shifted every day, but I think I was like prepared for the shift, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can stop screen sharing unless you have some other things you want to
Oh,
share
good
with
point.
us. The pictures are fabulous.
Thanks.
Oh, who's that?
This is a prion, like a small petrel. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay,
I
that
love following these guys.
with the wingtip in the water. Okay, that might be my new favorite bird. So,
They are fearless, man. We'd have these stormy days with like 20-foot swells, and this tiny, speedy little bird is just like diving into the waves. It was very inspiring to watch. Yeah, okay, we can stop the share. I guess there's one. You were talking about collaboration and maybe
yeah.
things that I didn't expect. Oh, mm, okay. A subject I didn't expect was like the shape of the water as well, like these sort of pops. So I worked on experimenting with color digitally. Yeah, but what I wanted to show before stopping the share is these. I did not expect to be able to use the microscopes to the extent that I did.
Mhm.
Um, and this is actually a close-up of a shrimp. Again, an example of like not the studies focus at all, right? This is not phytoplankton. This is not about like the mineral composition of the seawater, but this is a close-up of a spine, a spiny like leg of a shrimp that got caught in one of the filters. And someone on the crew who was aware of me and how I'm interested in the microscopes and wanting to take pictures of things, like brought this pile of dead shrimp to me. And so I was able to explore it and look for like these beautiful patterns um, and make imagery on scientific equipment, even if it was like for a purely artistic purpose.
Yeah. Looking at this and also thinking about that bird that I've never seen before, it makes me realize that this is a place that not many people get to experience. And have you thought about your role as a translator? Like, how do you imagine that the sense of place that you were wrapped up in can be like communicated? Like, I might be pretty early for this question. I'm just wondering, like, are you thinking about your role as a translator, an interpreter for the general public and wider audiences?
Yeah. Um, I think to be perfectly honest, it was pretty hard for me to leave. I was having such a wonderful um immersive time and like parts just my brain and body were like very happy to be there engaged in the work. But one of the things that made me feel excited about coming back was being able to take this immensity and like strangeness of experience. And I do think that the translation, the storytelling part is really, really important. That's another, I think the scientists, people who agree and are interested in having artists join them, right, understand that it's an important part of the science for people to care at home, to understand why we send folks down there, what we're studying, how we're all interconnected. And so yeah, I feel I'm very excited both to like take this enormous like trove of an archive and turn it into some creative research-based work, but something that does involve like telling the story of the cruise and what we are doing and what Antarctica is and what questions we still have. And yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Oh, that's cool. It also makes me think of all the time that you spent with those researchers, and I'm wondering, are there any particular like interactions or unexpected moments that really stand out from your time on the boat, um,
Uh,
that you'd want to share?
yeah, unexpected. It's strange because I'd feel like the whole thing was unexpected, right? And it's just saying like I didn't know quite what to expect. Just some like an example, we played a lot of games. Like there was both downtime in the shift for everyone. I was still running out and trying to like find photographs and sounds and make creative work. But there were times for playing a lot of cards, asking each other, 20 questions about your lives. Like there's a lot of sort of downtime bonding on the boat. Without the kind of distractions that we have in our normal lives. So um, again, I said it was sort of like the culture could be very silly and fun, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. I don't think a lot of people necessarily associate silliness and fun with like a scientific research cruise, you
Yeah.
know. But maybe that's just what we need to do, particularly in those environments to get through, and to do that kind of work in those settings.
Yeah, you make your own little language, right? There are inside jokes. There's games you've played like, 50,000 times with the same people and you're like back into the competition. It's very fun.
Let's see. I think early on when we spoke, one of the things that I really wanted to sort of pick your brain about is, and maybe this can be a closing question, but um, this bridging between arts and science communities, but just is something that we could talk about. But I'm also curious as an artist and also as somebody who's described yourself as a censor, like like what kind of similarities and differences did you see within like the practices and processes of being an artist and a scientist? Are we just naming ourselves different things, but we're trying to, I want to hear from you what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, such a great question. And I think as someone who's like very engaged with both vocabularies,
Yeah.
I think earlier in my like my career, I guess, or work, I liked to think that, oh, we actually just have very that we're asking the same questions so that our work is quite similar and the disciplinary boundaries don't mean anything. Um, but I think I've learned over time and being more immersed in specifically like science environments where the art questions are not actually the same ones being asked and the methodologies are different. It's sort of what I mentioned earlier about like it was really nice to have someone on board to feel like there is a role for let's all pause and look at the beauty of this image, or let's think about how we are connected to this archival photo of the same place from 100 years ago, which I found a few of those. Sort of someone who has that humanistic purpose. um, I think everyone on board, there are actually a lot of folks on board who are also certainly artists and had their own artistic practices. People sketched together, people jammed, played music together, but their job on board was still to make sure that the data came in or to make a plot for us to make a map, or, it was like the concrete purpose of science can feel different and that work can be all encompassing. So I think that where I see the difference is if you're in a role as an artist, or if that is what you're taking on with your work and your day in any part of life, right? That it is your job to bring together those different questions and the methodologies that might not be about like usefulness and utility, that maybe other people have these like dreams and thoughts, but it's kind of your job to implement them and to bring them to the forefront. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful thought to close this part on. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you both. Wow, it's so great. I just love, first of all, the photos are incredible. And I love just hearing about the experience on the ship and especially from an artistic, from an artist point of view, it's really fascinating. Um, so thank you both. We do have some questions. So the one I'd love to start out with is Madeline. So the person who's asking the question is really wondering about sort of before you went, like think about your preconceived notion of Antarctica and asking if that shifted when you were there firsthand, and um, sort of what happened with that, like if it did shift, what happened and what new perception resulted.
Cool. Thank you for the question. So one thing I will say about our particular research cruise is we did not make like landfall or icefall at the continent, right? And I think initially when I put together a proposal and thought about going, and certainly when I was like younger and like dreaming about going, I imagined actually like going to McMurdo or going to Palmer or something, right? Like being on ice on a station. Um, so getting used to and being inspired by this environment was very different than like first of all waking up and seeing maybe the same thing every day on a boat. We're in a different location, right, constantly. um I will say that some of the most magical times, that first image I shared when we're like surrounded by ice in the morning, when you wake up and you went to bed and we were in like more just non-frozen ocean, and you wake up and you're like surrounded by ice. Those are some of the most magical things, experiences I've ever lived through and sights I've ever seen. So that was beyond expectation, even if my initial expectation of this kind of work would be like in Antarctica proper. So yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question. What, like, of being, so you talked about science and being an active part of the science team. So you're working this 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. I mean, that sounds pretty challenging in itself. But I think when you step back for a moment and think about sort of the whole experience, what were the pieces that were sort of the most challenging in this experience for you?
I think I think trying to take internal pressure off myself of somehow doing all the things. I have a list still on my phone and in my notes of like mini projects to complete on boat, like small things to run around and do, images I want to capture, people I want to collaborate with on, a small thing we could have completed in a week or something, just unfinished business, unfinished projects. So, it's a time-bound thing that didn't happen. Uh, the other work also presented itself. That was really important, and I'm glad I made that decision. But I think, yeah, a challenging thing was to use the time and be content with the things that did in fact come out. Uh, Not being alone, but finding it difficult to have alone time for 24/7. I personally love being in groups. I loved our group. But I do think as an artist, but also maybe as a thinking person at all, right? We need some space. We need some like um some time where the experience is not about being with other people and just being with ourselves. So that was a challenge to like find where and when to carve that out. But everyone found their little spaces. Like I didn't notice that different people on the boat took different, like, oh, okay, they're staring off into space. I'm gonna let them go do that. Yeah, I would say those are two of the most challenging things.
Did you find your spot on the boat?
I had a few
Can you share
spots.
your favorite spot?
There's a part I like to go surfing by the stern, which is gonna sound, I was on the boat. I was very much on the boat and holding on. But there would be times when the swell was not big enough to be dangerous, but big enough to be fun. And I'd go out there and I'd hold on to a ledge and often have my camera in the other hand. Some of those photos of birds are when like I'm like literally riding the ship. Um, And then also there was an ice tower at the very top of the boat, which is a small room, like just enough for one person in a chair to look out and observe, almost 360 with windows around. So that was a really nice contemplation space.
Nice. That's really cool. I love the one room. I remember seeing a picture of that. Um, let's see. What about oh, what other types of wildlife? So you saw birds. The birds were amazing. Anything else? Do you see any other wildlife?
Yes. We did constantly the question for the rest of my life about this trip is going to be, did you see penguins? I did see two penguins. Most of the boat saw one penguin, which is, we did see a penguin. Uh, I managed to see another penguin when I was having some alone time on the bow of the ship, so the very front. Um, and I heard this honking noise, and it was kind of eerie and foggy out, and I was like, "What is that?" And I looked down, which is many, many feet down, and there's this penguin like and Adele like looking up at me from the boat, and then like diving or up at the boat and then diving down. Uh, so that was very special. We saw whales, multiple kinds like humpback, sei whales, I believe, minke. We saw a lot of phytoplankton, tens of thousands of these microscopic phytoplankton that I was on surveillance duty looking at through a microscope. And oh, I did see one seal as well. Yeah.
Wow, that's really great. So much to see out there, and I'm sure the ice in itself, it sounds like just viewing different days. I mean, I saw images of like pancake ice and other. Maybe tell us just a little bit more about the ice and the variety of ice that you saw.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're so right, Melissa. It's very dynamic. There are a bunch of different kinds, but it's also um they're also it's these giant like sculptural prisms, right? The light affects it, and then we're always moving on the boat, so the light is always changing. Actually, as a photographer, I found it kind of challenging at first to properly take a photo and that evokes the ice that I was seeing. But I think over time, if we have time, I'll share like my last image from that. Um, oh, hello. Zoom. Okay, so plankton. Yeah. Um, so yeah, figuring out which lens I liked, actually realizing that I like to be as close as possible. So this was taken from a giant telephoto, and just seeing all the different shapes and patterns and interactions with the light. The ice was also mesmerizing, even though we didn't see it every day. It was more like a special visitor, every few days or yeah.
Wow,
I have a-
that is
I have-
incredible.
I feel like I can hear this image, and I'm wondering, my sense is like, oh, you were in the Southern Ocean. It was perfectly like calm and quiet. But then I thought like this boat cannot be a quiet place. So can you tell us about the sound world that you were in?
Yes, thank you. And actually, I should have answered that way early when people were asking me, what didn't you expect or what did you plan on? I definitely was planning on all kinds of ice sounds and like the subtlety of different, ocean flavors where we were. I have so many recordings of boat noise. Fascinating boat noise, like different parts of the boat sound different. You can put your ear up to the wall and you hear it. Um, I had a hydrophone, like I dropped a microphone that's a contact mic built for listening underwater. I dropped that overboard a few times with a friend in IT helped me with that. But wow, we just heard so much of that boat. The bow thrusters, the like big industrial sound of the boat keeping us afloat and keeping us stationary too, right? It has to use its engines to stay put even. So yeah, boat noise constantly.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more question to ask, and then Walter, if you have a question that you want to close us out with, we'll do that. So another question that came in, this person was really curious about the camaraderie of the experience on the cruise and how this might affect future work. And do you see any of that playfulness sort of factoring in?
Ooh, playfulness is a great word. I think It was truly like one of the unexpected joys, just like the intensity and uh, like fun I said of this community. I think when people do envision a science lab, maybe if that's not their work, a science lab on a boat is a very like in my experience, it was a very like joyful and interesting and interested place. So yeah, I'd love to seek that out in others, in other spaces. I do think. Uh, I said I came up in performance, so there's a lot of my art like expectation that is like deeply collaborative and about play, but I still think sometimes uh, the reality is you like sequester yourself and try to sit with your thoughts and make a thing, and so I want to challenge that more, like get into that play space and get into it with other people.
I think I might have a closing question. I'm just thinking about, you're a worldly person. You've done a lot of work in a lot of different spaces. I'm wondering how this experience has like shaped your sense of the planet. Like like your I can imagine that like travel does change us in some ways, but this is like travel to an environment that like gives you some insight into like the vastness, the like it gives you a different sort of insight into the world itself and into nature itself. And I'm just wondering if the impact of being on the ship has shifted how you see like your relationship to like a city or to the to the this region that you live in, and or to the world in general. I know it's a big question, but I'm curious.
I want to write that down and like keep asking myself that question every day. Um, whew. I do think, I mean, even in the city, I'm someone who like goes to seek out a park and like in New York, like something like Prospect Park, a place where it's more less designed, and I feel like I need to be in closer to nature, whether or not that's separate from us, I don't know, but I I need that, and I think how even what I tell myself in those moments are like, ah, I remember that I'm on a planet. So it's interesting you use that word. Um, I think I took a really kind of shocking photo of the moon this time with that telephoto. I don't have it to share, unfortunately, but uh, I don't know if the sky was really clear or we're just like closer to a space where that's what you end up focusing on, but it felt so close. And I feel very tender about our planet. I feel like protective of it, but also that like we all live in it, you know. I think the imagination that I would go down to Antarctica and come back like with more wisdom about the planet feels really different than the reality of like I came back with a bunch of new friends on this boat, you know, we're all like floating through the world. It's more like we are all on this planet together. I think I have more of that sense at the top of my mind right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Madeline, as you're creating art from this experience, we will be sure to make sure folks are able to see it and interact with it. Is there anything you want to tell us about people were asking like where they might see the art, or maybe that's something we're still figuring out?
Yeah, I wish I did have an answer to that, but it is a down the line kind of thing.
Yeah,
But I will, from the beginning, something that hasn't changed from my proposed project is I want to be able to share some of this online. So it's just like massively available, whether that is just sharing photos or something more multimedia and immersive that you could still experience at home or wherever you are. So when some version of that is ready, I will share it out through Polar Steam and hopefully folks can see it.
excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have both of you here today. And thank you to everybody online who joined us. We really appreciate you showing up. And as I mentioned, a recording will be posted on our YouTube channel once we have a chance to process the subtitles. Um, if you haven't joined our email list, and please do. That's the best way to stay informed. If you scroll down on the website to the very bottom, please join. We look forward to interacting with more folks, and it's just great to see such a great group show up today. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Walter. We really appreciate having you here today. And with that, thanks everybody. We'll wrap it up. Bye-bye.